Professor Chair, good morning. Good morning, colleagues. Prof has already told us the emphasis is on our guest, but as you do know, we just metamorphosized from externally funded projects office into a directorate. So we think that every opportunity that we have is important to let you understand what the mandate is about. So I'm doing this for and on behalf of the DRID team led by Dr. Nyadofe. DRID started first as a unit in 2005, and it was then called Donor Support Office. For those in linguistics, we had a very renowned professor called Professor Kongolo Nati. He started to run the Donor Support Office in 2005, following the university's engagement with Carnegie Corporation of New York. In 2007, led by Professor Akwesi Asabri Ameyao, we established the External Funds Office. Moving along, we noticed at one point in time that External Funds Office was being seen as a wing of the Finance Office. So in 2009, the name External Funds was modified to reflect Externally Funded Project Office, so that people understood that our work was to manage research. But it's also important to brief you that in 2009, something very significant, even though it was not noticed, happened in the university. We used to have School of Research and Graduate Studies. That year, the word research was taken away from graduate school and added to external funds, because graduate school was not managing research. So in 2009, we got the name Externally Funded Project Office, also to include the concept of managing research. Then in 2020, as most of you are aware, the mandate of Externally Funded Project Office changed to reflect staff development, because we noticed that most of the projects that were being taken were within the development of staff, but also more importantly, we have introduced what you call the research fund, which research fund we'll find another day and talk about. The fund has been set up. The guidelines we haven't been able to adopt, and because of that, staff have not been able to source that. In the last meeting of the Grant Steering Committee, they directed DRID to look at how they can modify those guidelines so that staff can source money from the research fund. The mandate of the office. So DRID exists to coordinate the development of research policy for UEW. It also exists to oversee the implementation of funded research projects. Initially, we were seen as just managing the fund aspect, which was becoming very problematic, because you need to carry out an activity before you can expense money, or you need money to go and carry out an activity. So if you just concentrated on the fund part, leaving the programmatic aspect of it, then it means that something very big is left behind. The other mandate of DRID is to initiate and oversee the implementation of an award scheme for excellent research. Just like our Pro-VC rightly said, many of us concentrate on looking for other heads of department or being a dean, because we think that's where we get income. In our informal discussion, I was telling somebody, take your pay slip if you're a head of department or if you're a dean. Your allowances is about 3 times or 4 times your salary. So everybody seems to be interested in that. But Prof hit it on the nail when he said, there are people here who are not heads of department, but because of research grants, they earn higher than deans of faculty. And we need to know it. Apart from the fact that it develops your career, and you turn up getting better opportunities than others who are not doing the research. The other mandate of the office is to expand external donor sources so we can support the university. There are 2 things here. One is the financial leverage. Because as a university, we cannot do everything alone. We need to get funding from other sources that can free the university's internal funds, apart from the fact that it also projects and gives the university a good name in the international community. The aim of the office, or one other mandate, is to improve upon relationship between the university and the funding organizations. It's also to oversee the efficient management of research grants, manage the staff development fund, as I mentioned earlier, initiate actions aimed at promoting research and grantsmanship among staff of the university, which is one of the things we are doing today, initiate capacity development program for all staff of UEW, provide physical and logistical support for funded research in the university. Now, those of you at the back, I'm sure you'll be able to see what is written in the boxes in blue. But this is the organogram of DRID. At the topmost, we have the University Council, followed by the Vice Chancellor. Then you have the DRID Board, which is chaired by the Vice Chancellor with senior management in there. You have the Director of DRID. You have the DRID Management Committee. You have faculty coordinators. It is important that we highlight something on faculty coordinators. When Prof. Brikwan was acting as a VC, one of the things he did for us was, the university is stranded in terms of IGF. We already have graduate coordinators in each of the faculties. So instead of assigning somebody new to be a coordinator for grant writing, he asked us that the graduate coordinators combine that function. So we want to tell all faculty that in every faculty, there is somebody who is in charge of coordinating grant writing, so that at least at the faculty level, you can organize something. But also, when we get funding sources, we can send this to this person and know that this is our contact person whom we can rely on. The rest are, as you can see down, the various units that constitute the office. Right, so there is a small card that we gave to you, just some summary about the office. So you'll find that these things are there. So what is our staff strength? Currently, there are about 6 staff on site at the Directorate. 4 are part-time and 2 are full-time. 4 are part-time, 2 are full-time. But like I said earlier, we do have the virtual faculty coordinators, so that the faculties can have somebody very close to them in the event that they need any consultation. On this note, on behalf of my director, I'd like to end here, but please, as Provici admonished us, our focus today is to learn how we can do it from other sources, apart from what we already know. I thank you very much for the opportunity.
Dr. Ofenyadu, to introduce the speaker for today.
Thank you very much. Chairman, professors hearing gathered, deans, directors, heads of departments, ladies and gentlemen. Our guest speaker was a language teacher. She is now a professor in deaf education and also the Director of Research and Innovation at the School of Education, University of Leeds, UK. As a language teacher, her interest was in how languages are learned in exceptional circumstances. And as a professor of special education, she developed the Teacher of the Deaf training program, the first ever in the UK to train teachers to work bilingually with sign and spoken languages. In her leadership role as Director of Research and Innovation, she is responsible for the development of an ambitious and productive research environment in Leeds. She is an active researcher, and she has led funded research projects that investigate deaf children's multilingual language and use and development. One of such projects is the research on the education of young deaf children and their caregivers in Ghana, a UK-Ghana collaborative project funded by the British Academy's Early Childhood Education Program and supported under the Global Challenge Research Fund. This project involves the School of Education in Leeds and the Department of Special Education, Faculty of Educational Studies in the University of Education, Winneba. She is the principal investigator of this project, and I have the privilege to work with her as one of the two co-investigators in this project. I can therefore attest to her passion for academic research projects and grant proposal writing. Ladies and gentlemen, we have much to learn from her, particularly in writing and winning research grants. You will therefore agree with me that she is the right person to deal with the topic for this seminar, building research capacity and grant capture opportunities in the University of Education, Winneba. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, with a round of applause, shall we welcome Professor Ruth Swami.
Well, I'm quite overwhelmed standing here, but thank you all very much for inviting me. Thank you, Professor, for the introduction, and for Dr. Bibi, Dr. Faye, for welcoming me and making me part of the DRID ambition. It's really lovely to be here, and I'm looking forward, I hope, to sharing some insights with you from our experience. So, as Dr. Faye says, I'm a university professor in Leeds in the north of England. I've gone through my academic career as a language teacher, as a teacher, and as a researcher, and through all that career have developed my interest in how deaf children learn language, which for me is the most profound challenge to language learning I can think of. So, as I think Prof. Andy said, I've carried on developing and researching and asking questions over and over again on this area. So that's a bit about me. I come from Yorkshire, which is a very beautiful part of the north of England. My colleague, Dr. Daniel Furby, asked me last week before I set off, how is England? Well, it was autumn when I left, so these are the colours, and I think you'll agree that it's all very beautiful. But it's fantastic to be here, and I'm looking forward to working with you. So the brief was to talk about grant capture. And I started to think about, how do I talk about grant capture? How do you start talking about grant capture? And I had to reel back, and think, well, grant capture takes place in an environment. It cannot take place just at an individual level. We care about higher education. We all work for this institution, an academic institution. We are not self-employed. If we want to be self-employed, it's really not consistent with an academic life, I would say. So grant capture takes place in a context. And so I thought maybe a good place to begin is to think about that bigger picture and how we can enhance that context so that it is a really fertile place for grant capture. So the first thing I think is useful to think about is how to cultivate a very vibrant, exciting research environment for all of us then to be able to indulge and be successful in grant applications. I'm sorry this is a bit small, but I will go through some of it. So I thought, well, what is a research environment? You know, that's not an easy thing to talk about. What does an environment look like? And so I went back to my own institution, just because as an example, to think about how we might consider what an environment is. And our institution focuses on developing an environment as that venue, if you like, the place that allows that interdisciplinary research problems to flourish, an environment that is a place that helps us to create new ideas, fresh ideas, and helps us to develop approaches to problem solving. So this is what we aim for in terms of developing our research environment. And it is our goal, and this might be useful for you to share, that one of our ambitions is to develop within that environment, to take an approach that, if you like, is challenge-led. So yes, there's a focus of my research, but basically I'm interested in the challenges of a certain human condition. That's my interest. And so we engage in research that's challenge-led, but it also has global importance. So this is one of the ambitions, if you like, that I come from, the place that I come from. And the other, I think, focus of our environment is that we really push interdisciplinarity. And maybe that's not another area that we can think about here, is how can we use all the skills and expertise within and across disciplines to be stronger in our grant applications. So for a research environment to be healthy, well-fed, well-nourished, we need to invest in that environment. And I can see really well that DRID are really thinking about how to do this at UEW. So we need to make an investment in our space so that it can be a place where there is good leadership, and you're thinking this through in terms of how you work across the uni, where there's a place for growth, where it's okay to innovate. So sometimes innovations work and sometimes they don't. And I think we have to be allowed to fail as well. So an environment that encourages innovation and encourages problem solving. As I said, I think an environment that encourages people to work in a way that is challenge-led is important, but also user-led. Who is your research for? Why are you doing it? Who's going to benefit from it? Not you. You won't get money for your research, but it will change lives. So we have to think about how our research can be challenge-led, user-led, and for us, educationally focused, and I'm sure that speaks for a lot of you here at UEW. So to create that looks, quite, where do we start? So one of the ways that I think is very useful to think about how to develop this environment is there is one resource in a university, just one, and it's the people. You have nothing else, you have to invest in your people. You are the resource. So a way to develop your rich environment is to back talent that you have, bring new talent on, strengthen your culture and that space. And I've tried to think about that in 3 ways, if you like, 3 ideas. And one is, think about how you support in the uni the development of research careers, and I mean through the life course. So from cradle to grave, as we say, how do you support the development of those early researchers coming through and onwards into the professoriate? So investing in your people, thinking about, for these young researchers, is there stability? Is there any point in them doing research? Or are they going to lose their job next year? Where is their progression? Can they see that, oh, I'm coming in, I'm new, but if I work with this team and I develop this, there is a route for me. So are you Are you building that in? Are they recognised? Are you recognised for having a go at putting in an application? So we are recognised or rewarded in terms of time, not money, for trying. Okay? So I write down each year when I have my review, how many grants I've tried. And you know, I might put in 4 and get nothing, or put in 6 and get 1. But you have to be in it to win it. So that recognition and reward as part of career structure is a good place to start. Another area to think about in terms of developing the research environment is, what's it like working here? Is it a good place to be? Is it a good place to do research? Are you happy? Are your workers happy? Is the workforce fulfilled in this space? So I think it is. It feels quite, we say in the UK, touchy-feely. You know, what about people's well-being? But actually, if you look after people's well-being, they're going to likely be much more productive. So is this a good place to work? Do people feel good? Is management clear? Do people know where to go, to ask, to get help? Is it clear how this all works? How have you made the space and individuals visible? How are people seen at this university? And is there a sense of, and I don't know how this would work here, but at faculty level or school level or whole uni level, is there a sense of community and that sense of engagement? So I think how people feel in their workplace, although you might think, what has that got to do with grant capture? I do think it was all part of our research culture and our research environment. And finally, I have to put in the whole issue about equality, diversity and inclusion, because increasingly, all of our grant applications, all the way in which we work, we need to acknowledge the diversity of our workforce. For example, this podium was definitely not built for a woman. I am nearly invisible here. So that's a silly example. But how in our workplace do we encourage the diversity of our staff population to engage? How do we support them? Do we help with childcare? Do we make sure that women are encouraged to put in for the same amount as men? Do we ensure that people who are disabled have those opportunities? So the EDI agenda actually is a huge part of our research culture and our environment, and that comes through in the applications. So I think that was really important points I wanted to highlight. So going on a bit further into think about these research careers. To develop research careers, we have some ideas and things you can try. You can build career pathways and make those pathways really clear for individuals. And make sure that people that do come in on those short contracts, is there a possible way for them to continue with some tenure and develop? Otherwise, you bring in talent, you lose talent. You bring in more talent, you lose it. People go away and study, they don't come back. How are those pathways structured? Have you thought about your senior posts? You clearly are, and how you're investing in senior leadership around grant applications and around research. You know, is there a clear structure there? This is clearly in progress. Are the expectations clear? So do you all know, at your career stage, what's expected of you in terms of research, publications, impact, grant writing? Does everyone know what is the right kind of activity or the right balance of activity to be doing? Are those expectations communicated, or do you just get a big shock when you don't get a pay rise one year? Is it clear? You know, is it transparent? Is it clear when you recruit what your criteria are for promotion? Do you make it clear in your recruitment material that you're looking for expertise in grant capture or 5-star publications or impact and engagement work, is that reflected in how you bring people into your university? Is there something about you, if it's in your recruitment literature as well? And I think, again, there's my EDI note, these career opportunities, pathways, need to be available to everyone. Whatever their responsibilities are, if they need support to be able to work part-time or care and to develop research careers, then this needs to be transparent in the system. In terms of the place we all work in, leadership is crucial. I can't see Andy here, but we talked to him a lot about this yesterday. I'm sure he's here. So having that leadership up front with a clear vision of where we're all going is crucial to having this environment as a rich environment where research can flourish. And leadership takes that role in making sure that there's recognition, there is reward as we go through our research careers. And what we do is celebrate it. The other thing about the environment is we have leadership in one sense, but also, are we networked? Have you got strategies to make sure that your community is networked? So there might be some fantastic work going on in engineering and some fantastic work going on in social sciences that could work together really well. Are there some good networks for your PGRs, postgraduate researchers, to link up and work together and draw on those expertise? Within your community, do you have a strong mentoring structure? Do people come in, when we appoint new lecturers, they're appointed a mentor straight away? Do they have a research mentor? You can have a mentor around anything in your career, but people may want particularly a grant writing mentor, a writing mentor, teaching mentor. And these can be parallel, these don't have to be hierarchical arrangements. They can be horizontal. Easily, people can mentor each other very effectively. So that's a really nice thing to do for new people coming in, early careers. Later careers, I have a mentor, I still need a mentor, I'll always need a mentor. So I think mentoring can be a really strong feature of a rich research environment. And aside from that, those peer networks. So your PGR community, but also you might have a professoriate community where you meet. You might have a particular group, a research group that meet together. And peer networks are so powerful. And you can review each other's work, you can review each other's writing, peer review each other's grant applications, be those critical friends to each other. Dr. O'Fea's worked with me for 2.5 years now, and he was very kind, but I'm giving them a hard time, and critical friends, this is what we are, and we look at each other's work and we say, right, how can we push this up? And finally, in our space, it's important that everyone has an opportunity to be heard, to be listened to have a voice. So I can see if you have your leadership structure and it's clear, is there still looking the other way? Are there still voices in those committees? Do you have postgraduate researchers as one voice in the hierarchy committee? So I think this is important to think about how other levels at university are represented in leadership structures. That's the working space. And then on to the last one I mentioned, just to pull out a few points in more detail. Developing an inclusive and respectful environment. Again, you think, what's that got to do with research? It has everything to do with the way in which people can access research and become part of a vibrant research community. In terms of making sure everyone has access to those career progression routes. make sure you have an EDI policy and that it's implemented. So in your research policy that you're developing, you can have your EDI principles embedded in there. You might find that some people who have traditionally been underrepresented in research, that you want some particular mentoring schemes around building their confidence. This is very proactive. And reward, where EDI is taken seriously, I think it's important for leadership to reward that and recognise that. EDI involves training staff. People need to know what equality, diversity, inclusion, what does it mean for me as a lecturer, as a prof, as a manager, as a leader, as a VC, as a pro DVC. What does it actually mean in terms of my research activities? And I think we all need training, we all need it refreshing. And one of the most basic ones that we see in terms of research and research grants and equality and diversity is these short-term contracts. And this problematic. It's still problematic for us. We bring people in for 2 to 3 years, they develop these skills, it's based on the funding, and then they aren't able to stay on with us. So it's working out how we can somehow build support and career progression for those colleagues. So this is just a nice visual. There's a lot of text on those slides. My kind of summing up of the points I think are important about a research environment, and it's only within this environment that we start to apply and capture grants. It doesn't happen in isolation, and I think Prof made that point at the very beginning. Okay, now one of the other things that I think is really important to do when you're thinking about your grant capture, whether it's at an institutional level, faculty level, in your department, or as an individual, is to think, what is research? Sounds like a pretty basic question, but actually, I think it is important to define what you mean by that, and what you think is happening in that process, and to put that out there. And I think funders need to know that you've thought this through and you're very clear about this. There can be different ways of looking at this. We work to, and this is not for everyone, we work to a particular definition of research across the whole university. And it helps us be clear when we apply for grants that we are asking a research question, we are developing research. I think it was Prof that talked about the different sources of funding that you sometimes have, or it might have been Dr. Beebe. And I think it's like you've changed the names of the Directorate always to reflect that. And you've come down to now using the term research when you were using overseas something, support or... So I think it's really important at this stage to get that definition in your documentation, in your processes. So this is a research taken from the Frascati manual, and there's other definitions, but we found this one very useful. And then we look at research in 3 different ways. So either we're looking at research, basic research, where we're about acquiring new knowledge, new information. It's almost the purest form of research we sometimes think of, don't we? And then, but your research might be applied, okay? You might be doing research that is directed towards a particular practical aim or outcome. So it's not knowledge for knowledge's sake, it's knowledge for a very, very specific, challenge-led, if you like, outcome. Or you may be doing experimental research, when you're drawing on that knowledge from research and practical experience to produce new additional knowledge. This is the most risky, isn't it, the experimental? But it's a way of developing that research. So when anyone comes to us in my school or in faculty and says, I want to do this research project, we almost run it through this checklist, in a sense. Is this research? Should we be supporting this in the research office, or should we support this in another venue of the university, to make it really clear what we're aiming for? So I think that's really helpful. Oh, this is what you asked me to talk about. So, thinking about enhancing grant capture. Now you've got your environment set up, your leadership set up, you know your definition, you know where you're going as an institution. You need a spaces to develop grant capture. Sitting at home, writing a grant on your own, it doesn't work so well. Working in a centre or an environment or a research group where you can share ideas, bounce ideas around, can be a really, really fruitful place. So help people develop centres or small groups to develop these grant ideas. Have lunch times where they pitch to peers. I fancy doing this. These are my questions. What do you think? Let people share those ideas, whether they're small group or research centre oriented. We have, within our school, we have 4 research centres, and they're loose groups, but where we have all the themes around the research to do gather. So we use those spaces to develop ideas, support each other, bring outside speakers. You might find it's really useful, and this can be done at school level and faculty level, to have a small fund, doesn't need to be much, pump priming fund, which if you have an idea for a grant and you think it's got legs, as they say, but you just need to try some things out, and you need to talk to some stakeholders. Maybe you need a trip somewhere to get a group together. Maybe you need to go and work with 5 or 6 schools, and they're up in the north. You might need a bit of cash to get that idea going. You might need someone to do a quick fix literature review for you of a certain area, so you're right on the money, you're up to date with everything. So we offer some small pump priming funds, and I mean small, to give people a chance to, it's like seed corn money, grow the idea, get it started. So when you hit send on the grant application, they can see you've done your groundwork. And if you don't get the money, you've still started those ideas off. Quite a lot of people write those up as well as small pilot projects. So I think a little bit of seed corn money can be hugely beneficial to get things going. Get people involved with you. Be confident, reach out to the world. Who do you want to work with? You don't have to work with your next door neighbour in the next department. Who's doing something in your area, engineering, modern languages, sociology, politics, who is top of their game and you want them on your grant? You have to just write that email and invite and get a conversation going. And these are the strongest grants where the grant reviewer opens it and thinks, who's at the top of their game in the world in this? Oh, they're on this grant. I feel confident about this grant, it's a good team. One of the review questions when you review grants is this the right team to do the work? And so you look at who's there. So build your collaborations. And there's some things you can do, non-cost things, in your schools, in your groups, in your research centres, in your faculties, that can support people to develop grant writing activities. You can have grant writing week workshops. We've got one next week, and one in December and one in January, to help people build confidence about going for the bigger grants. People sometimes get a bit stuck with going for the small amounts of money, feel confident doing it, but are fearful of putting themselves out there for larger grants with big teams. So grant writing workshops, easy to do, very supportive. Bring in colleagues who've had grants to talk about their experience. Set up a peer review committee that's critical and kind at the same time. So where someone who doesn't know about your area reads your stuff, has a good look at the team, the costing, is it good value, and gives you some feedback. So a peer review college, absolutely invaluable before that grant leaves this building, leaves this university. So we peer review our grants in the school, and then we revise our grants based on the feedback, and we have to write a quick note on how we responded to the feedback, just as you do when you do an article. Sometimes when it's really high stakes, we are reviewed in the school and then in the faculty as well. And the faculty sifts the best ones to go. Make sure people understand how to cost a grant. One of the problems with academics is they're not that good with money. And so sometimes you get grants that are undercosted in terms of how much time it's going to take them to collect their data, analyse their data, write it up, do the conferences, go back, feed back to the users. You need to cost time properly in grants. The funder will know if you've undercosted and lose confidence. It's really important. When you do your methodology, everything in your methodology, it's a cost. So you work through your methodology, and I almost have a column here. So if I'm going to do that, I'll need this. If I'm going to collect data from 6 teachers, I'll need someone to do 5 focus groups. So that's a cost, that's a research assistant. Next. Yeah? So you're costing all the way through your method, you're doing a mental accounts list. And that's where, and I know the Directorate are doing this, you need good financial support for developing those grants. Yeah. Sometimes people leave costings to the last minute, and you can live with a problem for a long time if you do that. Building institutional sifting if it's helpful. If it's really high stakes and you don't want this university to go in and get a table reject because it's bad for reputation, sift and take the best. It's not a rejection of everyone else's, it's just saying we think this is the most fundable idea at this stage. So you're not competing against each other. Bring people together. So I know you've got faculty coordination, cross-faculty coordination. Get those ideas going. Bring health with education. Bring the politics together with the sociologists. Get the law involved with the education. Let's get the questions a bit broader. So you're really hitting, societal issues from different perspectives. Building incentives, and I don't mean extra in your pay packet, I know that's not realistic. But people need time to write grants. So you might want to say, if you've seen a call and you think it's a massive call, I appreciate that you're going to need the next 2 months. Just focus on that. We'll buy you out of teaching for 2 months. That is not a huge expense. And then get that grant in. We'll give you that space, that head space. Okay, so think about investing. And, in your promotion criteria, I think it is useful to say what you expect in terms of publications and grants as you go through the levels. So, one of the things that is really important to get right, and the hardest thing, know what your research questions are. Sounds really easy, doesn't it? It takes a long time to develop a fundable question. When you've got your question right, you spend a month trying to get your questions right, and you look back at them and they're good because they're obvious, but it's taken you this intellectual process to get there. So know your research questions, and you might have very different sorts of questions. Useful way to start that. Okay, how do I start? How do I get my research question down? think about it very broadly. I'm interested in how deaf children learn language. It's a very broad topic. There's a million questions that could be asked. So you've got your broad, then start tidying up, sorting, organising, reading. How deaf children learn language? What are the issues? What are the main issues? Oh, I've spent a few weeks reading and I think these issues fall into 5 or 6 themes. So starting to organise your thinking. Hang on a minute, I've done this reading and no one's talked about children in Ghana being bilingual or multilingual. That's funny. It's a bit of a gap in the research. I think I might focus my question on this area. So you're starting to identify where you're going to make quite a new contribution. So you've identified this gap in this space. So what are you going to ask? How are you going to think about what your question will look like? So your question might have a thesis. You might say, if you do this, this will happen. That might be a type of question. Or you might say, the literature suggests that deaf children who sign will never speak. That's an old one. I'm going to challenge that question. So your question will be placed, you can see what has happened. Your question has not been plucked out of the air. Your question is situated in the literature where you see a gap and a problem, which is why reading is a massive, massive part of writing a grant application. So a colleague of mine, she was trying to develop her ideas because she was a corpus linguist and used those in science ed, but she didn't have science ed background. She spent 3 months reading about science ed until she could see how her experience of corpus linguistics could be useful in that space, about how children learn science and use languages and use metaphor in science. So narrow down your topic. And then you need to test out your question. It's a bit like, when you get a cake out of the oven and you put a spoke in to see if it's ready. Is your question any good? Does it stand up? Does it hold water, as we say? And there's different ways that you can test that question. You can use this, or you might have other ways of testing your own question. It's called the finer criteria. It's handy. So basically, is my question feasible? Can I research early childhood education of deaf children in Ghana? On my own, no. With a Ghanaian research team, yes. This becomes a feasible question, a feasible proposition. So feasibility. Sorry. Is this question interesting? Well, who does it affect? Why is it important? So, is the question interesting to the research community? Is it interesting to educators? Is it interesting to user groups? Well, we think that this affects a huge amount of people in the community. It affects deaf people's autonomy as they go through life. It affects the economy, where people can't make a contribution because they aren't literate. So we think it's interesting. So we're giving that one a tick from us. Is it novel? Well, we did our background work, and we could find very, very few papers written about early childhood education of deaf children in the global south, for a start, in countries of the south who are low and or middle income context, and certainly in Ghana. So we felt we could see immediately this was needed, and it's a novel question because it is not a northern-based perspective. Is it ethical? Okay. Is my question, does it consider all the ethics that are involved, and is it likely to get approval? I want to video children interacting with their caregivers. or want to talk to caregivers about their experience of having a deaf child. Can we do that in an ethical way? I mean, we did have ethical approval for our work, and we thought very hard about it. But there are some questions when your students come to you and you think, I think we need to rethink this. It's not going to be an ethical proposal. Is it relevant? So in terms of relevance, is it relevant to development of theory? We think that looking at something with Southern theory is new and relevant. Is it relevant to the people you're doing it for? Yes. So these criteria, they're just helpful for you to double check your question and how robust it is, if you like. There are other ways of testing questions. There's one other you might like. It's called the PICO framework. Now, I think this often fits more in scientific research, but you might find not the case. But a PICO question is very much starts with the population that you're looking at. We could turn our research into this way. Who is the population? Is it clear in my question? What's the intervention or the indicator I'm studying? Is there a comparison group? We didn't have a comparison group, and often in studies of small and marginalised populations, you can't get these comparison groups. You can use the students as their own comparison group, but you might find that this is more relevant to some of the scientific research or quasi-experimental research, for example. Is there a clear outcome to our research? And is there a clear time frame? So it's nice because it brings in other things that the finer criteria don't bring in. This is nice when we thought for our next project, and I'm saying that in the affirmative because we are very hopeful. We're travelling hopefully to get the next bit of money, but we want to provide an intervention so that we can develop deaf leadership in early childhood education, and this fits much more in this is a helpful way to examine this question in terms of we're looking at a particular population and we're looking at a very particular group of participants who would benefit from this. So I think this is, we could probably use both the FINA and the PICO to evaluate the question, and I'm confident it's a strong question and that it's a relevant question, but we're keeping our fingers crossed. So in summary, research question in a grant proposal should be clear and focused. It should clearly state what you need to do to solve the problem that you have seen. Okay. Shouldn't be too broad. I want to investigate early childhood in deaf children. Well, it's still too broad. But it shouldn't be too narrow. We can't look at one grain of sand. Let's make this a really focused question that's somewhere in the middle. It shouldn't be such an easy question. It's not an audit. How many deaf children are there in Ghana? That's not a research question. I can go and find out tomorrow, probably, but I can ask Dr. Fay here to tell me. So no, that's not a research question. And also, it shouldn't be rhetorical. Somebody once came to me, it was a student, and she said, "This is my research question. Will cochlear implants be the end of the deaf community?" I said, that isn't a research question. That's a rhetorical question that's incredibly loaded. So you need to have a think about how these things are framed. Is the question researchable? Can you actually do the job? Okay. And I think this is important. Does the question bring analysis rather than describe? So my example, how many deaf children are there in Ghana? We could do some descriptive statistics on this. It describes the context or the demographics. And often you get a lot of PGR students that come with thesis, doctorates they want to do in their own setting, they want to collect information to tell you about the context. It's descriptive, and you're pushing to say, so why is that any, what are you bringing? It's great that you're going to look at autism in the Saudi context. It's descriptive at the moment. Where are we going to go with it? What will the field learn from your research with Saudi girls? It's, you know, it's that little next step. Does that sound familiar, Danny? Right. So we've had a lovely time thinking about what we're interested in, what we'd like to research, how we're going to develop our questions, how we develop the environment. But somebody's giving us the money, right? And you've got to get to know them. And I mean really get to know them. So part of your reading activity is get inside that funder. You know, just become, you know, Professor British Academy. I am just going to become that funder and learn everything I can learn about them. So go on their website. What do they care about? What are they interested in? What have they funded? Do you know all the projects they've funded that are relevant to you? So know your audience really well. Check your audience scheme notes. Okay, I've written a grant with somebody in the last 2 or 3 weeks, not in the room, who didn't read the scheme notes. I know they hadn't read them. I just know they hadn't read the scheme notes. Basic errors like the dates that the grant could start, or, I mean, things that the funder will just look at it and trash it. So they don't think you've engaged with them. They write those scheme notes for a reason. They are my Bible when I'm writing a proposal. Then I go back through them and check every line. Have I gone against them? They won't fund me to buy an internet bundle. I learned this last time. I can hire one. They'd have thrown it back if I'd put it in. We don't let you buy bundles. We let you hire bundles. So, you know, these are tiny things, but careful reading of the scheme notes. So we've been funded by the British Academy, for example. So we have to really think about, what does the British Academy care about? They care about people, they care about cultures and societies. So when we wrote the first grant, that's how we wrote it. This is a grant about people and about culture and community. We're going to work in an ecological way to understand that. And that was driven by their philosophy and how we could work with their philosophy. What was really nice was, it was such a fit with how we work. So we were happy to do that. I feel very comfortable working for the British Academy. Okay. It may be, here's another, I've taken these mission statements from funders just as an example. Okay. The UKRI, which is our big funder, UK Research and Innovation, but the ESRC, the Economic and Social Research Council, what do they care about here is they care about policy development. That's what they're really interested in, is how you are going to improve and develop policy, and they will fund education. So this is something we work with. They also they want to see in your schemes the support of postgraduates and are coming through the system. Great. So we know that. I can write that into the next grant. I couldn't have put it in the BA grant, they'd have thrown it out. The BA didn't allow that. So do you see what I mean? They've all got some different way of working, different things they care about, different things they're funded. The ESRC want data. They want to develop big data. They're interested in quants as well. So, you know, you need to go with that thought. They want to know what you're going to do with your data, where it will go and how you will use it. So I've applied to this funder. It's really hard to get their money, but it's much more about modern foreign language teaching and learning and policy development in the UK. I wouldn't have tried this funder at the moment for the project about early childhood in Ghana, because they don't have a global challenges brief at the moment. We're hoping that will change. There's another example, but different again. Arts and humanities. They care about the arts and humanities, philosophy, creative industries. These are people that fund you to do research around art, museums, libraries, theatre, opera. Yeah, this is different again. And they look for real creative methodologies, maybe visual methodologies, methodologies that involve media. Okay, so again, look at the difference across those three and how you might change your question, but also change your methodology to work with their vision and their brief. So know your funder. I don't know who your funders are, so we can maybe talk about that at the end. Know your audience. So, who's your research for? Is it for policymakers? Is it for parents? Is it for young people? Is it for a particular community? Is it for the car industry? Is it for... Who's it for? And I think you can't really develop what we call an impact plan if you don't really know that to start with. And we conceptualise this, and again I'm using examples that we've worked with, so excuse that, but we conceptualise this in an ecological way. So right at the centre, at the heart, day to day, this research is for caregivers and their children. You know, fundamentally, these are the people we want to benefit. Okay, the very centre of it, if you like. But more broadly, we want it to be for communities around those families and the communities they interact with. Okay. We also want this research, if it's going to affect children and caregivers, well, it's going to have to impact on teachers and clinicians who work with these children and caregivers. Okay? So we're moving out, can you see, from the tight, close stakeholder to those other layers.
It's 12 hours.
I know, does it feel like I've talked for 12 hours? That computer thinks I have. If we want to influence teachers and clinicians, you know, you can do your bit here at UEW, but hey, wouldn't it be great if there was some policy development that said, let's develop the early childhood courses to make sure they're inclusive of deaf leaders and particular needs around deafness and development. And then if you want this to be taken up and lived in a day-to-day, you want the wider society to understand what deafness is about, what sign language is, why bringing up a deaf child might be an issue or a problem for caregivers, and what they might go through. So our research, it is for those people, but our pathways to impact and the way we'll get to them is going to be through different ways and by understanding the ecology of their lives. So know who your research is for. And talking about it in layers is actually quite helpful. Yeah, we talked a bit about this at the beginning. Build in your partners and your collaborators. One of the things that one of my colleagues fed back to me was, the trouble is, people don't know about us. You know, we're not known. We haven't got a presence on the international, on Twitter or on, you know, if you Google us, we don't all come up individually. We haven't got our own websites. So yeah, develop your own visibility. And there are some simple things you can do, and you're already doing those. So that people look, they go, who is it wants to work with me? And they can look you up and find you and find a paragraph about you. So make sure you are visible. Because you need to know about the people you want to collaborate with, but they need to know about you as well. And they will look you up. And then when you're thinking about your collaborators, choose carefully. Yes, choose the experts. Don't choose someone the same as you. some of my colleagues, they put themselves on, then they put someone else on that has the same skills. So, and you think, well, why don't you bring in a different perspective here that's going to complement you? We don't need two of you. We don't need a clinician and then another clinician. What we need is a clinician and a teacher. Thank you. So you have this breadth of perspective in your collaborators. Choose really carefully. Make sure they care about the things you care about. I know it's quite difficult. One of the things I've done in the past when I've been thinking about who to work with is, first of all, write a short paper with them. It was quite good, and it taught me I can or I can't work with this person. Sometimes, because I've worked with people with very different philosophies from me, but I still thought this could still be a very fundable grant because we both come from this almost diametric perspective. So we wrote a paper, and it did work. So I have to put a lot of thought into who you can work with and you can work well with. And it's not just about going for the experts with the big ego. The other thing about your collaborators is, and again, you learn this, no passengers. If you want a collaborator, be really clear what you want them to do. Otherwise, they'll end up on your grant and you won't get anything from them, and there'll be time committed to them, and you won't get that intellectual leadership that you need. So you'll end up managing a team where you're not getting back. So definitely, you make sure you get commitment up front with how they will contribute to the grant, whether they'll lead the data collection at site or they'll take a particular part of the analysis. It doesn't matter, but it needs to be clear what their job will be. No contribution, no chop. I'm learning things as I go in the week. Yeah, so the time, the review I said, we did, I know it was a time commitment, but I think it paid off. Given time to develop those collaborations and to talk to each other, and before you put their name on. It's a strategic thing to do to build those collaborations, so spend some time thinking about it, but it can make the grant much stronger. And also, don't just think about academics. Do you want to work, maybe working with an NGO is what you need to do, or an industry captain, or the MOE, so think about, I can bring these things, but what do I really need on my grant to reach that audience and all those stakeholders that I can't do. So I think it's really, really creative space here to think about who you could work with. Funders like to see what they call co-constructed questions and methods where you're working with the audience for whom the research will be beneficial. Does that make sense? So you involve them in the process from the start. So it's very participatory. Really, really like to see that. And it's fair. I mean, it would be, when we set out to do Grant 2, we sat down with the deaf community and said, right, if we're going to develop deaf leadership, what should we have in this? We didn't make it up from our own perspective. Okay, so be clear about your contribution, and I mean what contribution the research will make, not how much time you'll put into it yourself. And I think that's really important, and it comes through in writing as well. And you might have different types of contribution, and I think we all do. So you might have a very applied contribution, that you've developed at the end of your work, an intervention for a particular group of young people, or you've developed a piece of machinery that you want to test, or a way of something you've contributed to science or medicine, and you're going to go through the trials for that. So this is a very applied, and your contribution might be applied. Your contribution might be theoretical. You might have contributed new knowledge that wasn't out there before. Nobody had thought this through, or it hadn't been unearthed in the way that you've construed it in your work. So it's a very analytical contribution to the research. Or you might have contributed an evidence base, so real empirical research, data, qualitative data that makes an original contribution to knowledge, so it's very empirical. The way that I've tried to help go through this, and I've used examples again, excuse us, but I've used examples from the project because they're the closest to my heart, I can explain them better, is the contribution the work has made so far. It cuts across, that's the other point. People's contribution is usually somehow a mixture of 2 or 3 of these. It's not just one often. So our work has an applied contribution. It's helped us to think about promoting and developing an intervention that involves deaf people in leadership in early childhood education. So we can see an intervention at the end of this. It's helped us to develop programs and strategies for caregivers to communicate multimodally with their kids. So it's a real applied outcome of this. But it has a theoretical contribution to make, and I don't think it would have been funded without this. It makes a contribution to how we understand deafness globally and sign language communication globally, and how constructs of childhood and childhood education are seen in different cultural contexts. The literature on deaf education early intervention is northern-based. We have brought a southern-based theoretical perspective to that. We've made an empirical contribution. We have data from caregivers, we have data from clinicians, from deaf leaders that have contributed to the development of this new theory. See what I mean? So you can make a contribution in many ways. All you need to be able to do is to be clear about what that is. So I've kept saying impact. What's the impact of your research? And I mentioned it in the environment as well, because one of the things that, as part of our university environment, is that impact is as important as research, and we consider that our impact should lead our research, in fact, and we reward impact work, not just the first stages, but the impact work as well. And I think that's important to say in terms of developing your environment. You might want to think about your teams and how you have a mixed economy of people writing these top whack publications. Not everyone can. Some people developing real empirical research or theoretical research. Not everyone can do that. Some people pushing the impact of the work out there so stakeholders, it changes lives and engages the public. So you've got different ways of making a real contribution as an institution. But all funders will ask, what's the impact? And how are you going to achieve it? Which we call pathways to impact, often. So the impact, if you define impact, it's the way in which your research has an effect, okay, or a benefit, or a contribution to the economic, social, cultural, or any other aspect of the lives of citizens and societies. Okay, so we're talking about, describe to me the benefits of your research. That has to be clear. Okay, we have to do that, and we would say our research will, okay, equip teachers of the deaf with the skills to improve the communication between young deaf children and caregivers. That's what we will do. And it will change societal attitudes to deafness and sign languages. That's great to say that, isn't it? Next question, how are you going to do it? So that's what we call, and it's useful to think about it like this. What are your pathways to impact? And you need to specify these in your application. So a pathway to impact is what you will do to make the beneficiaries aware of the research so that the impact can be achieved. How will you make sure this impact actually happens? So we had to think this through. We will work with, and be clear, teacher educators at UEW, head teachers, the Ministry of Ed, to develop curriculum and training. We'll work with, that's what we're going to do. So we've got this view that it will change these things for caregivers, but we see it happening through a training route and policy development. We will develop deaf leadership programs in early childhood and engage local communities and the media and interaction with the deaf community. So we want to change thinking. We will involve deaf teams in doing that and involve media and social media. So you have to be able to say how you'll get there, what steps you will take. Okay, I'm nearly there. I've got some summary points, let's just have a look through. Okay, writing a grant application, a really good one. Start with a good idea. Test your idea out. Get people to listen to you, pitch it to your peers. Come up here and say, this is my idea, what do you think? Okay, start with a good idea or a big idea. Make sure people understand why your idea is important. You might know really well. I might not have a clue why your idea is important. I might sit there and listen to you and go, so what? You know, what is important about what you want to do? Okay. Obvious to you, so you might miss it out. Not to everyone else. Make sure your idea is situated so they know. You know what the context is. You're up to date. And you know that this idea is ready to go. There's a gap in research and you know the context. So you're giving them that confidence, which is why I said before, writing that review article with that colleague was not a bad shout, because it made sure we were right up to date with all the literature before we wrote the application. And then we used the review in the application. Okay, so state-of-the-art knowledge. Make sure that your question or your grant application is theoretically informed. Okay, so you know what the theories are. You know that you might be working with a constructionist theory of education, but you know where that sits in your grant. And also that it's relevant to what policies are going on now. So we're working within special education needs and disability. We need to know what the policy context is, and we have an expert in the room on SEND policy, and we can't put the grant in without that. Okay, so theoretically informed, policy relevant. Make sure your questions are, when I say substantive, they're properly articulated. It's not just a question, what if, blah, blah, blah. It's almost like a mini thesis in a paragraph that you're going to examine. Make sure questions are substantiated and they're also informed. Okay? When you develop your plans, don't show off, just be factual. You need to develop plans that are feasible and well costed. You will gain nothing by saying you can do something in a year that you really can't do. Okay? You cannot interview 100 people in a year because they're spread out all over Ghana. Don't promise it. Promise something feasible with the money that you've got and use the money well. So you might need a mixed team, so you have people on different grades doing different things, so you can use your expertise and skills really well. And put those details in. And make sure you cost it. And they do look for value for money, but they don't look for you to cut corners. They really don't want you to cut corners. I've had feedback from funders before saying, don't you need a bit more to do this? So that's interesting. Think about whether you've used interdisciplinarity in the institution well, because that will make your grant stronger, that you've shown you've looked at it from different interdisciplinary perspectives. And you know, your question might be interdisciplinary. Ours is early childhood education is a multitude of disciplines, health and education being two of them. So bring in that interdisciplinary side if it's relevant. Make sure you collaborate. We've talked a lot about that. Think about your collaborations as obviously at higher ed, but beyond higher ed. Who'd be some great partners to have on board? And embed the impact of your work in the application itself, not as a bolt-on, but almost embed it into the questions and the development of the ideas. Then you've got to write it, okay? You've got to write the thing. Give yourself plenty of time to draft it, to have it reviewed, to revise it, to have it reviewed, repeat, okay, until you're really happy with it. It's very frustrating, but it's worth it. The more time we've put into reviewing, the more successful our grants have been with the big funders who are very competitive. So build your peer review college, build your critical, empathetical friends, and build in those review processes, which means you need to have your grant finished way before the deadline in order to allow for a review process. Okay? So don't skimp on it. It's really not worth it. Start early and get that review process set up. I had a colleague who asked, quite a junior colleague, to do one of the sections in the form that couldn't do it, and it just wasn't appropriate either to ask her to do that. So I think if you are working with co-writers as well in your grant writing, be realistic about what different people can do on the grant. You know, what you as a senior person can be doing and what people that are new to grant writing can be doing to help you. So, you know, work as a team here. The ultimate thing about these applications is the PI, the buck stops with the PI. So every decision, every costing, every bit of ethics, although you'll work as a team, the fundamental leader on this, who will take, you know, the rap for it, as if something goes wrong, is the PI. So that's job, you know, that last checking, going through the scheme notes that you know that you can repeat off by heart. That's the PI's job. I think that I've more or less covered the things that I think are important. I'm going to go back almost to the start here and say grant writing needs to be in a culture that's collegial, that's supportive, where there's a clear leadership steer about where you're going and what you want to achieve as an institution. It's not an individual endeavour. It is a team endeavour, a group endeavour. So I would say that leadership and collegiality is really important underpinning to the work they're going to be doing. So I think when people don't know what direction they're going in, they find it hard to function. I do. And I think that this is clearly coming through with the work the Directorate are doing, and I strongly say keep going with that because it's providing that environment. So the leadership, your community, you are the greatest resource your university has, is its people. So build your people, invest in your people, keep your good people. Don't let everyone disappear and do their PhD somewhere else and never come back. Make it, incentivize them to come back and continue to contribute to your research environment. So invest in the research community at all levels and involving the diverse range of staff that you have. So build your people. And I think it's fine when you've done those things. I think when you've done those things, it's absolutely fine to have high expectations. Have high expectations of people in terms of prior applications, but maintain and support those expectations. And I think within that context that's very fruitful and supportive, it's okay to be clear about what your expectations are. But expectations without support leave people quite vulnerable. So I think that combination of leadership, research, collegiality and vision are crucial. So I'll end with that, because that's where we started, is I can see things are happening. I've been invited to speak here. It's been great to see Dr. Ofei and Dr. Beebe talk about the DRID and where that's going. And I think this is the way forward, is to work together to develop that vision and clarity, and integrity as a research institution, and to develop that mentoring of new colleagues and the trust and empathy among everyone, and the inclusivity to build that exciting environment where people can go on and be successful in their grant capture. I hope that's been useful. Set of ideas. I'm very happy to talk about them, take questions. Thank you.
So, floor now open for questions, for clarification, contributions, and elaboration. Floor open.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for your Once again, I want to thank you for the expose. You mentioned that one should identify the direction of the institution, but I also noticed that in putting together a team, at times you have to go across institutions and get collaborators from other institutions. So how does that work? Thank you.
I think it can work in different ways, but I can give you an example of the way it worked for us, is that we work with our PGR community, postgraduate research, PhD community. We work with that community as colleagues, so we consider them to be colleagues, not students. And so when I saw a call from the British Academy for Early Childhood Education, I thought, there's a gap in this area that needs work. And I worked with my PGR colleague, who was Dr. Daniel Phoebe, and said, do you think that Ghana is a space where we could really examine some of these problems and some of these issues? So that was a collaboration that grew out of a collaborative PGR project, if you like. Your PGR community, honestly, the richness in that community is incredible, and they're often doing the most new research and the most impactful research. So I certainly think that's something to build on. But otherwise, that is where you are looking for partners. You're actively looking for those networks and partners, and you have to look around at what other research is happening. I use the literature sometimes and think, if I want to research multimodality in a particular context, who do I need to work with that I'm not aware of, that could bring something to my work that I don't have? So I think there's multiple ways you can do that cross-institution. Just to add to that, funders have different rules about working cross-institution. So again, check your rules. The funder we worked with had, under the Global Challenges Fund, were really keen that we worked as an equitable partnership. So they let us share the money, very unusual, but between the UK and Ghana. Other funders say the money's going to be situated in the UK, but 30% of it, no more, can go to another institution to work with you, or multiple institutions. So different funders have different rules about that as well. The Global Challenges Research Fund was really broke down some of those barriers, and I'm hoping that they will reinstitute some of that philosophy in the future. So different ways of doing it.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation. I want to find out, as a researcher, is there any situation where a researcher finds himself or herself looking for someone thinking alike or moving in a particular direction and never finding for years, and you are tempted to switch your focus to what other people are thinking, realizing what you know or think is still a virgin land untapped? What happens? What is wrong, or what is going on wrong with that researcher that is not finding someone who is interested in his or her area, but is finding it difficult to have switched off to other areas apart from the gap he or she has found? Thank you.
So I would sit down with a colleague that felt like that and ask them if they needed to reframe the way in which they're asking their question. Because it may be they've got an absolutely crucial area they want to work on, but the way they're coming at it, direction, is not being communicated clearly enough to interest other people outside, or they're not putting it in a way that you would be interested to work with them. So I'll give you an example. My really good colleague, who's a fantastic researcher, she's a corpus linguist, and she said to me, "You got that grant, a fellowship. I got a fellowship a few years ago." And she said, "I tried to get that, but I just basically wrote about corpus linguistics, and I didn't really think about how corpus linguistics could be used to improve cultures and societies." It was British Academy, and you know the brief now, because I've showed you. So she then, over the next few years, has changed her ideas to say, my work in corpus linguistics can have huge value in understanding how young people talk about science or climate change. Climate change, I mean, who's not interested in climate change? So she suddenly thought, no, I'm not asking the right question. I've got all these skills, I've got an area, she's top of her game in her area, but the question wasn't interesting enough to funders, and they couldn't see the impact of what she was doing. So I think that's what I would do first, is look at how they might think around their question a little bit more, to situate it within, to make it more compelling. Why is it compelling? Why did the BA give me the money and not her that year? Huh? Because she didn't make it clear that her research and her skills, absolutely brilliant, fundamental contribution to science ed. She's since got the money. It's a happy end.
Thank you very much. Prof, you mentioned PI. I think the PI is very important in your research. So if you have, how do you choose a PI for your proposal when you are writing? Do you have to pick the PI based on the discipline, or based on the PI, somebody who has managed projects before? Because sometimes it looks like they want people who have already worked and have experience. And other times you think that the one who fits to be the PI should be the person in that discipline. What do you do?
So the PI needs to give, when the funder looks at the application, they will look at the PI first, and they will need to feel, given you and your experience, that you are the most qualified to lead this research. And you are, the PI is the intellectual lead, not the management of the, yes, you are managing the grant, but it's the intellectual leadership of the project that the PI is in charge of. So the funders will want to know that that person is qualified, if you like, to intellectually lead the project So I think that's what they would look for first. You could bring other co-Is in different disciplines. They will bring something else, and you can make that very clear when you do your costings. You always have to do what's called a justification of resources. And that's when you can say, we need this amount of PI time because he has all the experience in engineering that we need, but we need this co-I in disability because she understands how we need to make this, this product accessible. Okay, so the PI, you're looking for the intellectual leadership of the project. Yeah, I think that's how I would always see it.
Thank you so much, Prof, for the presentation. I have 3 questions. First one, in the grant writing process, could you tell us the part that actually is very demanding in terms of mental exertion? Because it's important we know those things so that when we are actually putting to test, then we know exactly what we're looking for. You mentioned grant, the big grants, which means that one does not easily start and start winning the big grants. So, in your own estimation, where do we start from? Do we start from the big ones and gradually mature into the big ones? Then the third one has to do with funding of funders in developing countries. Ghana is a developing country, and for that matter, are there some specific grants that developing countries should be looking for? And will you be kind to let us know some of those funders? Thank you so much.
It's a good question. I think I spend most times getting my questions sorted out, research questions, because everything flows from there. Once you know what you want to find out, you can design a method. You can build the review case around you. Yeah. So I think that's what I look for, is that I understand the questions and where you're going. And the second one, I think that funders will then go through really carefully, is not your review, but your method. Does this method look like a method that could answer these questions? Yeah. I'm not saying we don't read the literature review, but to a certain extent you are trusted with this. But they will want to know your questions are clear, they understand where you're going, and that you have a methodology that will work around those things. The second question, that's an interesting question. So we had telling all these tales out of school, don't put them on there. We had a Directorate research faculty level who for 3 years said no small grants, stop people applying for small grants. Because it takes the Directorate as much time to process a small grant, and then you only get this much money, as it does to process a big grant where you get this much money. And so we were then, this for me in a school, saying, well, we're not very supportive of small grants, so if you can think about making your grant bigger. And actually, I'm not sure that as a strategy that worked. I think what I'm doing now is I've opened the gates, I've got a different boss, and said, yes, go for the small one, but build it into a program. Show me that your small grant is part of your thinking for over the next 5 years, that you have a plan. And we ask everyone every year in the school, and it's across the whole university, we ask everyone to submit a 3 to 5 year plan in terms of their applications. So if I see Phoebe, small grant, small grant, small grant, small grant, well then I might come back, yeah? But if I see, Daniel Phoebe's put a small grant in here, he sees that building to a network here. Some grants allow you to build networks. They're great to have. he sees that building to a 500k grant in the next 3 years. I'm confident there's a trajectory. So I think they have a place, and you can see individuals build up their profile towards larger grants. But I think you want to see that program. So we have, as I say, we submit plans, and I collate plans across the school, so I can see over the 5-year period, you can model the finances. You can see over a 5-year period what small, large, medium-sized grants are coming in and from where. But at an individual level, you can support individuals and say, what's next year? Okay, what's in 3 years? All right, what about in 5 years? So you can see that progression through. Does that answer? I can't, it's not, I usually can remember, but I think I'm tired, so I've forgotten the last one. The last one was about funders. I think you need to look locally and globally for funders. I mean, there are global funders who want to bring in LMICs and make sure that there is inclusivity in terms of our funding. But you have funders, Pan-Africa, across the African universities, that I don't know as well about, and I should know more about these because we should be looking at these as well. So I think you need to do both, to be honest, is to look locally and globally. Because you might find your local funders are more concerned with your interests, whereas you know, and then build up to those global funders, and they are probably going to be more competitive, aren't they? So I think you need a mixed economy here.
Thank you very much for your insightful presentation. I was following you closely, and I have jotted down 3 points deducing from your presentation. The first one has to do with fit to core, research problems, and the question. And the last one has to do with methodology. Now, all these are about proposals. At what point does one talk about contributions in terms of policy, in terms of practice, and in terms of theory, since the whole thing is about proposals?
Okay, so the contribution that you're making needs to be very much embedded in your proposal. So you will have these questions that your proposal centres around, but the funder will be looking for an argument of what the contribution is. Now, you might have a policy contribution that's very clear. You might not. You might have a theoretical contribution that's very clear. For example, one of our funders, you might have heard of Leverhulme, they are really open to high-risk theoretical contributions. And that might be where you put your grant application, if that's the contribution that you think you're making. We have a contribution that's quite centred on policy, and we found this funder quite open to talking about contributions in terms of policy. So I think you need to put it after your questions. These are my questions, and this is the contribution I'm making. And you don't have to contribute in all these areas all the time, but you need to know what the funder wants to contribute to. Do you understand what I'm saying? If they see themselves as a research funder that pushes cutting-edge thinking that's high risk, that's you thinking, right, well, I need to make my contribution clear that it's around that area. If it's a funder that cares about policy development like the British Academy do, you've got to be really clear about how you'll develop that policy. ESRC wants to see policy development, but wants theoretical advancement. So you've got to make that clear in your proposal. So again, each time you've got to go back to the funder and look at how they judge and proposals and what they see as their mission as well. So I hope that answers your question, but I think it technically comes straight after your questions, research questions.
Thank you very much. I'm coming from a finance background, so I'm a little biased the way I'm going to ask my question. I was interested the way you're emphasizing the costing aspect of the proposal. And so I was wondering, does it add any value to have somebody with a finance background on the team, or do we just consult maybe an accountant or somebody else to help with the costing? Thank you.
Okay. Don't let academics do the costings. Take it off them. So you need a costings team. So as soon as you know there's a grant, someone's starting to develop a grant, a big grant, you need a costings team around them that understands the funders and how to cost properly. Otherwise you'll end up in a big mess. So as soon as I know someone in the school is putting a grant in, the way we trigger it is everyone in the school, if they're thinking of writing a grant, they write a very short expression of interest, just a paragraph, that comes to me and the head of school. It says what the grant would be towards, how much, what would be needed, collaborators, etc. And I have to kind of look at that in the scheme and see if we'd be losing money on doing that work or gaining any money. Sometimes we have to do grants that we don't actually get anything back from, but especially with charities. And then when we've approved it, we send that through to our research support office, who have people that specialise in costings. So they know exactly, if I'm saying we need to bring 6 people in from all over Africa for a writing workshop, they'll cost that for me, so I won't make a mistake. Otherwise, things can go horribly wrong. And also, if I want to buy in a member of staff, they know how to buy in a grade 7, a grade 5. They will talk, my costings person will talk to your costings person and work out how much it would cost, for example, to have Danny on a project for a day a week, or Joyce on a project for a researcher for a day a week. Do you see what I mean? So yeah, that is an infrastructural support mechanism that is quite straightforward, but you as a writer need to work with the costings person early. So once they know we're writing a grant in our school, and I've approved it and the head of school's approved it, someone in the costings team gets in touch with you and says, when you're ready, let's have a meeting about what you need to do this grant. And they will help me work out costings. And she'll say, Ruth, you said you're going to do this, but you've not put in any travel. Oh, okay. Okay, or you said this, but don't you need equipment for it or an interpreter? So they are experts in doing this, and I can't emphasize enough how valuable that is. So that's a great question.
Thank you very much for that great presentation. I like the point you espoused about institutional or contextual peculiarities influencing grant capture. The fact that if the institutional environment in itself is conducive, then grant capture becomes automatic. My question is, what would be your key advice for those who are new in grant writing, given the fact that people who have a history of grant capture get to win the grant? So if I am new, what should be the key thing I should focus on? Thank you very much.
Great question. I would get a mentor. I'd work with a mentor, so approach somebody whose work you understand, that you relate to, that is in your area, and I would ask if you can either shadow their next grant application or play a small part on their next grant application, so that you gain that experience of being involved in grant capture. It's one of those really hard things to start, isn't it? I've never had the money because I've never had the money, and I can't get the money because I've never had the money, kind of thing. So to be on somebody else's grant, even as a small role that's very specific perhaps, I think is a brilliant place to start. So I would find a mentor who's research active and ask if you can work with them and shadow them and support their grant development in order to support your development. And go for training. Find whatever training you can. If it's not training here, you know, look at whether there's support for you to do some grant writing training, or even set up institutional workshops where you all support each other. Definitely, but I think mentoring cross institution, faculty, I think it's a great way to start. Yeah.
Thank you, Prof, for the presentation. I just want to find out if there's any particular way to attract partners or PIs from institutions outside. In our situation, I know that Dr. Kobe was your student, so it was easier partnering with him to do a project here. But those of us here, if you want to identify somebody in your institution to do a PI for us, how easy or what should be the process or procedure you can go through to ensure that?
So if you wanted to do a grant but involve somebody from outside Ghana or outside this institution, what would you do? Yeah, how do you come? So the question of visibility, there's lots of ways you can do it, and we all know the social media ways. I hate that, but I make myself do it. I mean, we've got social media and Twitter, and academics love it, and I know it's a thing, and I need to be a bit more grown up about it. You can become very visible on Twitter. You can put your work out there. You can have a very professional account. You can have a good UEW account or a Directorate account or a project account or a faculty account, and you can talk about your work and put something out there every day, and people start to follow you, and you follow people that you're interested in, and then they follow you back. So I know it's one way of doing it, and I sometimes think Twitter's a bit of an academic echo chamber, but it is a way of connecting up. So I think that's one thing you can do with other types of social media. The other thing is your writing and where you publish and where you get things put out. If you can't write a full-blown 5-star paper in the best journal in the world, do a working paper. Put it on the website. Make sure the university has all these working papers you're all doing that are on the way to becoming publications and peer reviews. Make sure they're known about. So when I look up, I'll still find you. If I want to know who's done some work on early childhood, where you haven't got it into a journal yet, but your name will come up on Google because there's a working paper attached to UEW, and I can read about what you're doing. I was talking yesterday, Max Planck Institute in Germany, they have hundreds of PGRs, and while they're trying to do their thesis and they're not ready to write the papers, they put working papers out on the website, and they're available worldwide for me to see what work is going on and how they develop their methodology, for example. So get those working papers out there that give you that presence in the academic debate. So that's one way of visibility. I don't know how your website's set up, but everyone has a profile page. So when I Google people in the UK or in Europe, or their university website page comes up. So I can find them, find their publications and their grants and how to email them. So this is simple. It's technical, it's one page, and it means that we know where you are. And then the other thing, so that's you being visible. The way I find people to work with is through my reading, I guess. So you know who's doing the best work in deaf leadership, for example, in early childhood, because you go to the conferences and you see who's presenting, or you do a quick literature review of the area, and somebody keeps coming up over and over again as the key contributor. So you do that bit of searching and your bit of sleuthing, detective work, to find out who you really need to work with on your project. And when you ask someone to work with you, I think it's good just to think, this would really support our project if we work with this person in Germany or wherever. What would they get from working with us? And I think you just need to articulate that so it's clear that it's a bit of a transaction. So I don't know if that helps some strategists there.
Shall we go down to the floor? As a sign of gratitude, appreciation. The Pro Vice Chancellor will begin as a closing remark, but we will want to show our appreciation And that will be done before the glossary. Let's go and together for
Do I have to add up?
Prof, please step forward.
Oh.
Ain't that beautiful? The only university in Ghana that has both the creative and the performing arts. Let's do better.
Okay, thank you very much. Colleagues, I'm glad you've all enjoyed the presentation from Prof. Ruth Swanwick. Every time that we get opportunity to be in a forum like this, as intellectuals, we learn new things. And that's why we came here, wanted to have new ideas, wanted to learn new things, new skills. And I think we got that. I'm not going to be in the business of summarizing what has been said in an hour. I don't do that. I think that everybody has gotten the message. But more important, for us in management and leadership, the idea of research, leadership, and collegiality is very important. And I think that is something that has been missing for some time, and we need to cultivate that. So we in leadership, at the deanship level, at the headship level, we need to begin to cultivate the idea of research leadership so that as an institution we can also grow. All the rankings you see and we are not there because of research and publication. And that is why we need to encourage this kind of presentations and forum as we move forward. I would like to also thank DRID and especially the Department of Special Education because I can see that they were instrumental in getting Prof here, and that's why we are here in the numbers. But also grateful to other faculty members who have come here. Now, so the challenge is go and also start your own. Next time, it will not be special education, it may be another department that will also summon us to come and listen to new ideas. And the more we get this in, the more we cultivate the idea of grant writing and research. So on that note, personally and on behalf of the Vice Chancellor, I want to thank you, Prof, for the insight into how to capture grant. And I like the word capture. The moment you capture it, you make sure that it doesn't go. So I want to thank you, and we also want to thank the organizers of this forum. Even though the vote of thanks will come, I want to thank everybody on behalf of the Vice Chancellor for coming. Finally, the room is full. So next time, maybe you don't come here, we'll go to a bigger forum. Thank you very much and for all of you.
Mr. Chairman, Professor Andy Ufori-Birkwan, Professor Ruth Swanwick, Director of Research and Innovation, School of Education, University of Leeds. Dr. Yao Nyadu Ofe, the Director of Research, Innovation and Development, UEW, senior members, both teaching and non-teaching, here in presence, postgraduate students, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed, good afternoon. I thank the Directorate of Research, Innovation and Development of this noble university for giving me the opportunity to express my gratitude on this special day. It's an important day in the history of our university. Today we hosted a seminar on building research capacity and grant capture opportunities in the University of Education, Winneba.
quite a number of senior members, both teaching and non-teaching, from different faculties are participating in this ceremony. And this, to me, is a huge success. Can we put our hands together for that? So on behalf of DRID, I express my heartfelt thanks to the Pro Vice Chancellor of UEW, to Professor Ruth Swanwick, to Dr. Yaunyadu Ofe, to Dr. Bengab. I would also like to thank all deans, directors, heads of departments, senior members who have blessed us with their presence. We are grateful. I would also like to thank the organizing team. I would also say a big thank you to DRID, to the Department of Special Education for putting this together. I would say kudos, you have done a yeoman's job. I would also like to thank our media partners for covering this event. I conclude by once again thanking our Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor Ruth Swanwick, as well, our Director for DRID, all respected representatives, all officials of participating faculties. Thank you for making this seminar a success. So I end with a quote which is apolitical, and I'll say that money likes noise, so we should, it's apolitical. Money likes noise, so we should all put all hands on deck to move our university forward. All hail UEW. Thank you.
We suffer a while, so shall we be upstanding as we take the closing prayer? Shall we pray? And so we thank you, God, for a successful program. We pray that you grant the university management the resources and the wisdom to provide the support that is needed in the area of research. May we, as senior members, teaching and non-teaching, other workers of the university, seek to do that which is essential in our work in this university with respect to research. We pray that it will not just be business as usual, just attending and adding on to our CV that we participated in a program like this. But that we take the needed steps to improve our research activities. This and many blessings we ask. And as we live here, may you continue to be with us and protect us. In Jesus' name we pray with thanksgiving. Amen.